Are back on the Learn NASCAR DFS strategy series here. Let's talk a little bit about the car versus the driver because a lot of times, especially in the Xfinity and Truck Series, you get a driver that changes cars. Or in the Cup Series, like between seasons, guys will switch teams. How can we attribute like the skill to the driver versus just how well funded the team is?
Right. Yeah. It's something that we see in the Xfinity and the Cup Series, and behind the scenes, it can probably just be attributed to how much money a driver is willing to funnel to a team in order to secure a ride. One of the best things that you can do is, besides keeping track of driver performance, is trying to keep track of what happens with individual cars. Now, of course, if we're talking about the top tier teams, this isn't something that you're going to worry about, because Kevin Harvick is not going to lose his seat to jump some Joe Schmo from Des Moines, Iowa, who races in the Xfinity Series because his daddy has a lot of money in the corn industry. This is going to happen with these lower tier guys and these lower tier teams. They get the seats that they can through their sponsorship, through whatever money that they have. They buy those seats, and then sometimes they lose those seats and they either don't race for a weekend or they move around. But the thing that always stays the same is those cars and their numbers. So if you can keep track of how, say, the Rick Ware 51 or the Rick Ware 53 or the Rick Ware 15, how these cars are doing on a week-to-week basis, and not just look at how the drivers are doing, because these drivers could swap seats multiple times throughout the seasons. If you'll keep track of what these individual cars are doing, you'll get a better idea of what to expect from a driver when they do land in that seat.
Definitely. The cars that they're in are huge. Now, they talk a lot in NASCAR about the sponsorships and how that can affect a performance. So, if a guy gets a new sponsorship, is that something that can elevate their performance immediately, or how does that work?
Yeah, the direct corollary is that the more sponsorship money that you have, that generally results in the more R&D that goes into the individual car. So for example, that you have a major sponsorship with Budweiser, and that money is going to your team. Well, your team can take that money, invest it into research, invest it into development to give you a better car. That's why when you look at some of these smaller, cheaply ran teams, their sponsors aren't national sponsors that you recognize. They're local sponsors, maybe somebody local from that track that they've got to sign on for a week. And that money isn't going to go far. In fact, that money may not go into 1 ounce of research and development. It may just go into buying a set of tires.
Definitely. I think the parts, this is something I didn't realize when I started, but like the top tier teams, they'll have like a completely new car almost. Like once you drive a car like for one race, it's not a top tier car anymore. And those parts get, I'm not sure, like, did they get sold to the lower tier teams at that point? Because I know like some of the lower tier cars are using the same engine like 3 or 4 times.
Right. These upper echelon teams, they've got the money, they've got equipment to throw around, where they don't have to keep reusing the same car over and over again. Whereas these smaller run teams, if they're not just outright buying somebody's old used equipment, like in the 2020 season, we found out that Go Fast Racing, the number 32 car that Corey LaJoy used to run, they had a technical alliance with Stewart-Haas Racing, but all that technical alliance meant was that they were buying old chassis from Stewart-Haas. So we're talking about they were buying 2-3-year-old chassis. That was as far as that partnership went. Meanwhile, Stewart-Haas Racing, if they need a new chassis, they're just going to the shop and they're buying a brand new one. So the money coming in plays a major role with the level of equipment that you have and how well it performs.
So one thing that we're always scared of, especially in the lower tiers, is the start and park, where the guy like sometimes they like say it's like car failure, but really like sometimes these guys don't have any intention of finishing the race, and then you're totally screwed if they're in your lineup, basically. So how can we figure out how to avoid those guys?
Yeah, this definitely comes back down to seeing what drivers are doing throughout the season, how they're finishing, because drivers move around from season to season, and you could have a driver that had maybe a fairly all right ride, but they had a couple of bad seasons, and now the best that they can do is race for one of these lower tier teams. So if you're looking at what they've done in the past, it's not a true corollary of what they're going to do this year, because the team that they're racing for this year, they have no intention of competing. It's just go out there, run a couple of laps, claim that the transmission broke, and we're going to get our winnings for finishing 40th or 39th place. This doesn't happen that much in the Cup Series, but it definitely happens in the Xfinity and Truck Series. So you have to be aware of these teams and these drivers that have a tendency to do this. And once again, it goes back to look what car numbers are doing from week to week, because it's almost a little too obvious to spot what's happening in the lower Xfinity and Truck Series, because it's a very apparent pattern. For example, if you look in the Truck Series and look at the finishes of Norm Benning throughout the years, you are seeing an older driver that gets his truck ready, goes out there. He might have a couple of races each season that he's going to compete in, like a couple of road races, maybe Daytona, because the purse is so big. But then everything else, it's run around for 5 laps. Oh, hey, something broke in my axle. I need to come in, and you don't see the guy for the rest of the night. These guys, even though they're cheap, even though they might make your lineup work, their ceiling is almost non-existent, because they're not going to pick up 5 or 10 spots of place differential. They're going to finish in the 30s. They just have such a low floor and a low ceiling to offer your lineups.
Definitely. There are definitely some guys that you want to avoid in NASCAR DFS. So figuring out who those guys are is almost as important as figuring out the best plays. Guys, thanks for tuning into the Learn NASCAR DFS series. We're going to talk about some common mistakes beginners make in the next video.